Hi everybody, Francisco with The Dev Life. About a year ago, I wrote an article on Medium giving tips on how to become a software developer. In this video, I'm going to talk about the same article, but in video format. How do I become a software developer? That is probably the most popular question that I get on Instagram. I'm going to give my point of view on this. This method might not apply to everybody because everybody has different circumstances, but if it was me now giving this advice to me 10 years ago, or shoot, I think it would have been 20 years ago when I was getting started. So this is the advice that I would give to myself. How do I get started? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to learn the fundamentals of computer science and programming. You need to be familiar with computer architecture, maybe not be an expert, but at least understand the pieces that go into a computer. Processor, memory, storage, so things like that. I think you need to become familiar with that stuff before you move on to other things. Another important thing that you need to learn is algorithms and data structures. So pretty much the fundamentals of programming. At this point, you probably don't know or might not know exactly what you want to do, but whatever you might be going into, learning the fundamentals of computer science and programming will expedite your learning process, because when you start picking up a language, whatever language that might be, you would already have this knowledge under your belt. So I really suggest that you learn the basics of computer science. Another question that I do get is, what language should I learn first? This is really a loaded question. And the reason why I say it is because at the beginning when you're learning, it doesn't really matter which language you pick. And for some reason, people have the need to compare one language to another, even though sometimes those comparisons don't make sense. Sometimes they compare, should I learn Python or should I learn Java? Or should I learn C# or JavaScript? And those, as you start learning more and more, you'll understand that sometimes those questions don't make sense, because once you decide what you want to go into, then picking the language is a little bit easier, because a lot of the languages are specialized or do better in certain situations. For example, I'm not going to go in and try to write an iOS application using Visual Basic. It just doesn't make sense, right? So, and there's different scenarios similar to that, to where it doesn't really make sense. And when you're learning, I wouldn't worry too much about the language, which language you are going to use to learn programming. I would suggest going in with maybe Python, maybe PHP. I think Python will probably be my number one recommendation, because the syntax is really easy. I've been hearing a lot in the last few weeks that people are struggling with JavaScript a lot, learning JavaScript. And I think that's due to the fact that, one, they skipped learning the fundamentals, and two, the syntax of JavaScript, it's a learning curve to learn the syntax. So I think if syntax is not really a big issue, I think Python is probably could be your go-to language to learn. But if let's say you don't pick Python, let's say you pick Java as your first language, it doesn't really matter. You are going to be learning. You're not going to be building applications at this stage. At this stage, you would be just learning. So don't spend too much time deciding what language you should learn first. I think learn the fundamentals, pick a language, and start building things. Once you start getting into programming, then the next question you should ask, and this kind of will also help you pick the right language to keep learning on. This question that I think you should ask yourself is, what do you see yourself doing as a developer? Do you see yourself working with data? Do you see yourself building web applications? Do you see yourself doing mobile applications? Maybe you want to be full stack. So once you decide, okay, you know what, I like this, I see myself building web applications. then maybe you should start thinking about JavaScript, maybe picking a framework or a library like React. But the key to this is, what do you see yourself doing? And you can always change it later, right? So let's say you pick one path to go in, right? So let's say you want to be backend, right? Then you want to start looking at languages, maybe going back to Python, maybe you want to do C#, maybe you want to do Java or Ruby on Rails. Depending on the area you want to start with, then the number of languages you can use gets narrowed down to obviously a smaller group of languages you can use for that, or should use. So I think sometimes we do this backwards. New developers want to pick the language first and then try to find out what they want to do. I think we should reverse that and ask yourself first, what do you want to do, and then pick the language. Before I wrap up the video, I want to mention one more thing. Another challenge that I do see, and I see a lot of new developers struggling, learning, and maybe some of them give up, is because they try to learn too many things at once. You might want to become a full stack developer, but that full stack means that you know pretty much the front end, the back end, and maybe other things in between. So shooting or aiming to become a full stack right off the bat, it's very difficult. I would suggest that you pick either the back end or the front end or mobile, one of those, and then once you're proficient enough in one of those, then you can start moving on to maybe learning the back end, or maybe vice versa, right? Maybe you started with the back end, now you want to learn the front end. Don't try to learn the front end and back end at the same time. I suggest you stick to one, get proficient at that, build a few projects doing that, and then start learning the other part of it. The reason for this is that if you are not proficient in the back end, you're not proficient in the front end, and you try to go get a job, it's going to be more difficult for an employer to give you a position because you're not good, or maybe you might not be good enough on either one of those things. But if you go in and say, well, you know what, I'm proficient enough on the front end, can I get an entry-level position as a front-end developer? Once you have a job, once you're on the job, your learning process, or you just learn so much more once you are on the job versus learning off of YouTube, or maybe going to school or boot camp or whatever else you might be doing. I think you learn a lot more once you get a job. So aim to get a job right away or as quickly as you can. And I think the best way to do that is to stick to either front end, back end, or mobile. I know I said it was just gonna be one thing, but let me just add one more thing before we wrap up the video. And this is start building fast. And what I mean by that is, don't wait until you feel like you are ready to start building an application. Start building now. You can learn and build at the same time. I think once you get past the fundamentals and the very basic knowledge of whatever language you chose to start learning, go on the web and look for a project that you could build. Sometimes we have a hard time thinking of what to build, especially when we are new. Find a project that you can build on the language that you chose to get started with and start building. And I guarantee that you'll learn a lot more by doing it that way than if you wait a year until you feel like you are ready. I think that once you get past the fundamentals, just go and start building, and at the same time learn. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe so you get notified whenever we publish new videos. Stay tuned and catch you in the next one. Thank you.